It may have gone under the radar for many people this year, but we're actually getting another Hellboy movie towards the end of 2024. However, this isn't a sequel to the 2019 David Horbour version of Hellboy, or even a third installment to the Guillemo Del Toro and Ron Perlman version of the character. We are getting another reboot of Hellboy. Even when the 2019 reboot had been announced with David Horbour taking over the role of Hellboy, a lot of people were angry, wanting Guillermo del Toro to finish the trilogy of films that he had planned with Ron Perlman. Guillermo del Toro has said many times he is ready to go with a third movie, and the star, Ron Perlman, has said even in his 70s it's going to be a lot of work, but he owes it to the fans to complete this trilogy of movies. However, it appears that rather than give fans what they want, they're doing another reboot. From my understanding, the reason we have got a third reboot is because the film rights to the Hellboy character were optioned off to a studio, and if they don't actually use the film rights over a certain period of time, they will lose them. So in order to keep on to the rights of Hellboy, film studios will produce a movie in order to hold on to those rights. And from the looks of this trailer, this is a much cheaper version of Hellboy than we are used to. The David Horbour version of the film seemed to go a bit cheaper than what Guillermo del Toro was doing, and the reason the third movie in that trilogy of films wasn't greenlit was because it wasn't a good enough return on investment for the film studio. They thought they should do a cheaper version of Hellboy rather than fulfilling expensive contracts with Del Toro and Perlman to complete a third movie. Despite this version looking cheaper, it does seem to go into the horror aspects of the character of Hellboy a bit more, whereas the Del Toro version was a bit more fantasy focused. This does appear to be a more outright horror film than some big fantasy comic book movie, and maybe this can work, I'm not too sure. This time round we have Jack Kesy playing the role of Hellboy. And this isn't covering the ground we've seen in the movies. This is following a younger version of the Hellboy character. The film is set in the 1950s, and the synopsis is as follows. Hellboy and a rookie BPRD agent get stranded in the 1950s rural Appalachia and discover a small community haunted by witches and led by the Crooked Man. So whereas the other versions of the films have covered Hellboy in his older form, this is almost a teenage version of the character, or a young adult version. Although because Hellboy ages very slowly as he's half demon, but if you're not familiar with the comics or the concept of Hellboy, this is going to be a bit of a surprise for you. As the studios want to maintain the rights to Hellboy, they're going to make a much cheaper project, so doing a more horror-based story seems like a wise course of action, but to be honest, there doesn't seem to be a lot of effort put into this film, and it's surprising that it's going to get a release anyway. It could become a cult classic and people may enjoy what the project has to offer, but because of the fans behind the Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman films, I feel like this isn't going to do too well. Then again, because it has a much smaller budget than the previous installments of the Hellboy franchise, the pressure for it to make a huge amount of money is not going to be there, along with what happened with the second Hellboy movie from Guillermo del Toro. The shots of Jack Kesy in the trailer as Hellboy in the makeup and the suit are a little bit disappointing. I don't think he looks absolutely terrible. It does look cheaper, but that's what you get when you have a cheaper budget compared to what we got with Ron Perlman or David Horbour. Personally, I think the David Horbour version of the character looks the best, but I think most people prefer the Ron Perlman version of Hellboy. And this film has seemingly also been endorsed by the comic creator Mike Mignola, who may have only just been paid some money to endorse this, but he says he's very happy with the project. Though he could be telling the truth, because although he did work alongside Guillermo del Toro on other projects, del Toro wanted to complete the trilogy of his movies in a comic book with Mike Mignola, who turned that opportunity down, so he may actually prefer the content of this film for real. I'm not too familiar with the comics of Hellboy, although I have liked the Hellboy movies enough. And one of the things I have seen in the one comic I do have is Hellboy in Hell. The visuals are very striking. They are very specific in how they look, and Mike Mignola's admitted that he only draws things in a certain way, but it kind of plays to that comic, and the idea of this vision of hell in that comic book I'm talking about is very unique and could be done in a really visually impressive way, even on a smaller budget. But whereas this film is going to be told in some mountain region with villages within the Appalachian mountain ranges, it's just going to be not that visually striking, and they've just filmed it either on sets with some green screen, or I don't know if they did any live sets, because there were no leaks of this being shot. So even though it's a much smaller comic book movie compared to anything of Marvel and DC, I still feel we would have got snaps of them shooting stuff on set if it was being shot on location. The fact that this version of the film doesn't have too many big names attached to it, and that's not necessarily something you need when making these types of movies, as long as there is a good story and a good creative vision. But the trailer overall seems to be working as this horror element, which I'm not sure if people are going to enjoy as much as this big fantasy element we've seen in the previous films, but we'll have to wait and see. This could be a sleeper hit, and this seems to be the type of movie that could do well on streaming services rather than like lighting the box office on fire, which I don't think it's going to do, just because of the contention between not getting a third Hellboy movie from Guillemo Del Toro. I feel like this movie is going to bomb. The David Horbour version only made $55 million globally, which is quite bad for a comic book movie, but that did have a budget of around $50 million, production budget that is, and we presume there was a lot of money put into marketing, so it would have been a financial loss. I don't particularly know if there's any value into holding the film rights of an intellectual property if you're not going to make something that's profitable, so I'm a little confused as to why they're not going back to finish the trilogy with Guillermo del Toro. If this film, I don't know the budget exactly of this, but I presume it'll be smaller than the Hellboy 2019 version of the film, so I reckon this has a budget of 20 million at most, maybe even 10 million. Even with a production budget of that little, but then having a marketing budget of, say, double that, it's not really going to be profitable considering they've already made a loss on the other Hellboy films. So I'm curious to know if there is value in holding the rights to Hellboy if you just make films that are going to make no money and you end up with tens of millions in losses. It just doesn't work. I could see a version of Hellboy done again, a reboot outside of the Del Toro version of the character. If they threw a lot of money behind it, I think lots of fans could enjoy that, and that could reinvigorate the interest of the Hellboy character. And it just feels like this isn't the type of film people are going to get behind. There is a comic book fatigue, and whereas Hellboy is a different type of comic book than we're used to when we're being forced to watch Marvel and DC most of the time with these $200 million budgets, this just isn't going to land for the audience, I feel, even though I give it credit for trying to do something different from the mainstream comic book movies. But maybe this could look a bit better when they release more footage, or when the film actually gets released, and it could get good reviews, even if it's on a much smaller budget and it does look slightly cheaper. So we'll have to wait and see when the film comes out if it stands up. So that's it for this video talking about the upcoming Hellboy The Crooked Man movie. Have you seen the trailer and what are your thoughts on it? Do you feel that it just looks too cheap and too bad, or are you going to give it a chance? Do you see any redeeming qualities in the trailer that we've been shown? Let me know in the comments below. Please give this video a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and please make sure to click the bell icon to receive notifications for all of my videos. That's it for now. Thanks for tuning in.